OccupyFantasy.com. And now we're live. What's going on, everybody? This is Moose and Brian here from OccupyFantasy.com, at OccupyFantasy on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. I'm your host, Moose, at CFB_Moose on Twitter is where you can find me. Co-founder and data guru here at OccupyFantasy.com. Here with Brian at BrianJesterFF on Twitter, co-founder and CEO and preseason extraordinaire of Occupy Fantasy. Brian, how's it going, man?
I'm slowly getting back into the Eastern time zone, feeling good. It was definitely hectic this morning with preseason UFC and all the other stuff behind the scenes, but glad to be here. What's up?
Yes, definitely. I went to a K-pop concert a few days ago, the first time ever, and it turns out your body gets sore when you haven't worked out in 3 years. You just jump and scream for 3 hours. So back to normal now. I'm ready to absolutely crush some preseason. If you, let's chat it out with our members, the people who are watching, and let's hope one of us can win some money. So we're gonna be here for probably I think till 5 o'clock or so. If you have questions, go ahead and ask. The only thing we will say is this is preseason. We're not trying to give away all of our edges, so don't ask who's the top play, which wide receiver do I play. All that's going to be in our preseason DFS picks article, which I will actually post in the chat, which you need to be a member for Occupy Fantasy to see. But if you have questions about specific players, playing time, stuff like that, we'll go ahead and answer. So, Brian, we'll just go ahead and get it started. The cover boy of the plug, Malik Willis, quarterback for Tennessee. Why is he the cover boy?
Yeah, so we actually saw him get a half of work last week. He was a rookie draft pick. I know our guy Ken made a lot of money on him going to the Titans after day one in the draft. But yeah, so he played a half, and he is a scrambler, can run. We saw him run for a touchdown last week. But preseason is all about reading between the lines, looking at historical trends, watching camp practices, and seeing what reporters are saying. And reading between the lines, to me, it sounds like we could get a lot of Malik Willis tonight, in the sense that he could even be the snap count leader at the quarterback position. Now, if he just played a half, and there aren't many guys playing more than a half tonight, if he just plays a half, he can still be the highest score because of his rushing ability. We know how valuable that is in fantasy. But Malik Willis got majority of the reps in the most recent joint practice, which is always an indicator. We've hit on a lot of guys so far this year and last year when looking at snap counts in joint practices. And Vrabel said, I've talked to Logan Woodside, who's the other quarterback, the quarterback 3. He's been with them for a couple of preseasons. And he said, I've talked to him about it. We need to see what Willis can do. So just read in between the lines. It sounds like we could get Willis to start the game, get into the second half, or if he doesn't start, come in earlier than expected. But I think 3/4, maybe even full game upside for Willis. But it's one of those situations of Moose where it's high floor, high ceiling, because even if he only plays a half, he has the ability to put up 10+ points, which is all you need in preseason DFS.
Yes, there's nothing worse than you have your preseason lineup and you're like, look, guys, I don't need you to do too much. You don't have to score a touchdown. Just get like 2 catches, maybe throw for some yards. I just need like 4 points from all my guys, and it's easier said than done. But it always sucks when you have your players that you picked and you're like, oh man, he scored a half a point or a point. You're like, I just need like 3 more points from you, man. Come on. But no, that's why we love it. Yeah, that's why he's our top low risk option cover boy, all stuff like that. Brian, you mentioned that there weren't many quarterbacks that were getting a half. Are there any ones that you feel comfortable saying that you think might get some extended playing time or half a game playing time?
Yeah, so I'll just walk through it. And I think quarterback playing time is one of the easiest to find out there, so we have no problem giving away those edges. And as I said just a couple minutes ago, we've talked about it in the plugs before too, there are rare slates where a quarterback actually comes into play for preseason DFS. Most guys, assuming it's one of those slates, and I think tonight's one of them, where guys are playing a half, right? It's not like preseason week 3 where guys are playing a full game and some are playing a half and vice versa. Well, most guys are playing around the same amount of time, and it's a quarterback position. Like, most guys are scoring between 5 and 15, and that's not going to make or break you. What's really going to make or break you are those running backs who put up 10+ points, those receivers who get 100 yards or a touchdown, and you really don't gain much at quarterback. I do think, however, Willis could be that guy tonight, so that's why we have him ranked number 1. But if you're looking around the league on the 5 games tonight, Tampa Bay is interesting. Kyle Trask played 82% of the snaps last week. Tom Brady is God knows where, not with the team. He's not going to play. So it sounds like Trask's going to get similar work as last week. The San Francisco situation is pretty interesting to me as well, Moose. And this is one of those joint practice reading between the lines scenarios. And just looking around the industry, a lot of people are on Nate Sudfeld, the quarterback too. Trey Lance isn't going to play tonight. But it was Brock Purdy who played most of the joint practices this week. And he's a rookie quarterback. Sudfeld has been around the league before, has been in this system. I think he only handled 6 to 10 snaps or something in that scrimmage from what I read. And if that is indicative of playing time in the regular season or in the preseason game itself, Purdy could play 3/4 or up to a full game. Now, it's not something we're guaranteeing, but I think if you're playing in the 25K to first or 20K to first on DraftKings, I think you have to include Purdy in your player pool because he actually has the upside to play most of the game, which I don't think a lot of people are talking about.
Yeah, and especially I know you said quarterbacks may not necessarily matter, but especially a low-owned quarterback. Preseason is all about these low-owned gems that you can find through information, and because there's nothing more bad plays only than NFL preseason. I mean, we're on the worst of the worst plays in terms of like skill caliber, but I'm sure Brock Purdy's a good guy, and he's someone that can get you there if he's super low-owned and gets the touchdown pass from you. You get 6-8 points or so, you're looking really good there.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is, right? What if he somehow plays the whole game or plays 3/4, and no other quarterback on the slate plays more than a half? Now we got a playing time edge, and he could be the highest scorer, and he's got some decent stacking options as well. It's super intriguing for the highest risk, largest field contest. Other guys that are going to play some, Trevor Lawrence is going to play into the second quarter, and we like starters who play 1/4.5, 2/4 because we know they're actually good. Kellen Mond's going to get a half. Easton Stick's going to get a half. The other guy I've seen a lot of talk around the industry, and we were on it early last week, was Skylar Thompson for Miami. He ended up playing the whole game last week. But it sounds like Tua's going to play tonight. Teddy Bridgewater didn't suit up last week. He might play tonight. So I think Thompson, despite how much he played last week, doesn't nearly have the playing time upside this week. So, yeah, I'd rather play those other guys that we've talked about.
Yeah, it makes sense. There's so many other options that we at least know what their floor is, and we're not rooting for someone's ceiling versus someone's floor.
Exactly.
Yep, exactly. Keeping on the subject of quarterbacks, this is always something that that I always find interesting. It can be a struggle with sometimes to do. Is we like to do stacking in NFL regular season, 3x1s, 2x1s, 3x2s, etc., depending on the contest type or whatnot. But with preseason, so many guys coming in and out. How are you finding which players you need to stack with which quarterback?
Fortunately, we've done all the research and we put it in the daily plug for you. So whether you're playing the showdown contest or whether you're playing the regular main slates, and you play a quarterback, you're like, who should I stack with them? We have the stacking options listed. And how we find that out is we dig through the play-by-plays from the previous weeks, and we see who was in the game with which quarterbacks. But also, reporting's getting better and better each year. So we actually know when these joint practices happen or when these practices happen before a game, we know who's out there with quarterbacks. And so for these quarterbacks who have similar playing time, playing a half, we pretty much know who the receivers are going to be. And by looking at the air yards data we have, by looking at the snap count data, we can pretty much pair it. And the guys you don't necessarily have to stack with are guys like Willis who can rush, guys who might play the whole game and are playing with different receivers coming in and out. So we outline that in the plug if we need to. But to your greater point, Moose, you don't need the super stack, right? You just need to get one touchdown. So by playing a quarterback with one receiver, and because so many guys are rotating on both sides of the ball, you don't have to bring it back like we do in the regular season, play a game stack. It's just quarterback plus receiver plus pass catcher, and that'll get it done in preseason.
Makes sense to me. So I'm looking here at the chat. Hello, David. He's been saying what's up. What's up, Taylor? And shout out to Cedric Lawrence, who subscribed before the stream and has Discord access now. So Cedric, if you want to go ahead and reach out to us, we can go ahead and get you hooked up with Discord. We're answering questions after the show in Discord, always answering questions in Discord. A bunch of people are sharing a bunch of information in there as well. Any late tweets that we see that we don't have time to update because it's so close to lock, we'll share it in Discord. We'll go ahead and tweet it out as well. If you guys have questions, we're here for another 15 minutes or so. Go ahead and take it from there. Brian, another position, we'll switch to another position here, is, and I think this is probably the one with most variance and people don't really care about, is the team defense. I think you're multi-entering this slate, right?
Yeah, I haven't done it yet, but I'm probably gonna 150 max. It looks like.
Okay, and so let's say from that high level standpoint, the 150 max, or even I guess you could go down to people who make just one lineup. Are you just really just picking like not really focusing on team defenses that much? Just let's just pick a team with a that where the opponent has the lowest team total, or yeah, just kind of take me through your process on picking defenses.
Yeah, I think the Vegas odds can trust us, can steer us a little bit here. And normally we look for that in the regular season, but it helps in the preseason too because it generally tells us how much the starters are going to play and how much the backups are valued. And so playing against terrible quarterbacks is always an easy way. One of the most tilting things, not just in DFS, but in life, is the Patriots defense specifically being 40% owned and scoring a defensive touchdown. They do it once a year. Hopefully they already got it out of the way. They did it last night at like 40% ownership and got a touchdown on the last drive of the game, which was just absolutely devastating for those who didn't play the Patriots defense last night. But yeah, I don't think there's a reason to play some of the chalkier defenses. And the other thing to remember here, most, is that unlike the regular season, you can play defenses against your guys because defense are the only position that are out there on the field the entire time. So I wouldn't worry about playing a defense against your receiver, even your running back in some spots, especially on these slates where we have 5 or less games.
That makes sense for me. Yeah, and just by going off that, it looks like some of the better defenses tonight: Chargers, Miami, Vegas, Tampa Bay. Yeah, so just pick some of those good ones and just make sure it makes sense. Make sure your lineup tells a story.
I would even say real quick. I would say like if there are quarterbacks that you're not playing that we project to be popular, like if you're not playing Malik Willis and you're playing Trask or one of these other guys, right? Play the defense against Malik Willis. Get that double edge. If you're not playing Kyle Trask, play the defense against Tampa Bay, right? If you're not playing Trevor Lawrence, play the defense against them. So guys like that. I think the Miami opposing defense is interesting too if people are going to play Skylar Thompson, right? So I think just looking at ownership is as it always is a great way to pick a defense for preseason as well.
Makes sense to me. So, cool. So, yep. So again, go ahead and ask questions. We're here to answer you all's questions while we do these live streams. Brian, any tidbits you want to give away while we're waiting for some questions?
Yeah, so 5 games, one of the larger slates, and there are some spots we need to look for pregame warm-ups. We always need to look for the unexpected spots, right? Those are actually the best ones when we get something we weren't expecting. It's Sylvester meme for us, updating the plug and scrambling, but it's that's when we get the biggest edges, and we see the field doesn't adjust often enough. But there are also spots where we need to know, okay, we need to be on the lookout for this because these guys are questionable. Right? A couple spots tonight that stick out to me. One is the Minnesota running back situation. Ty Chandler, who by all accounts has been great in camp. He actually rolled his ankle in practice and didn't return. Kevin O'Connell, the coach, thinks he's going to be fine tonight, but if he doesn't play, that opens up more snaps for Nwangwu and their other running back whose name Kobach, right? So you're looking for these position groups where if one guy is out, it automatically bumps up their playing time some. Another one that's super interesting to me, it's a later game, is the Chargers receiver situation. And Joe Reed, who absolutely smashed last week, he missed practice with illness 3 days ago. He did return the following day, but we don't know what his conditioning is like. We don't know if they're going to hold him out still. So that's a guy that could be very popular that might be inactive in warm-ups, right? So it just shows the importance of having to monitor these warm-ups pregame because what the plug looks like now and what your lineup may look like now is not how it's probably going to look at 7 p.m. Eastern.
Yes, there will always be updates out. I mean, I was looking at the plug from yesterday. I think we had like 4 major updates and several other minor updates. Yeah, so especially it's like preseason's like NBA where you're going to need to be around lock because things happen, even minor things happen that you may need to adjust your lineups for.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I'm actually just pulling up here, Brian. Do they have any satellites for tonight? I can't remember.
Very minimal, not a ton. It's a pretty poor satellite selection on all sides.
That's fun. So, what type of contest selection would you recommend for someone with more of a small, medium bankroll? Let's say you're not 150 maxing, you got some money in your pocket, you want to have a good Saturday night. You already put your UFC lineups in. What kind of contest would you play that you're looking here for?
I mean, a lot of the Singletary and small field stuff is really good. But honestly, I even think, and we don't recommend this very often, you can actually play some of the bigger GPPs with a couple of lineups because of the edge that we think we have. So I would shoot for some of those even, but you can play pretty much most of our low risk plays outside of one or two and do really well in small field contests. So I would definitely look there.
Yeah, and I'll also say as well that they do have the second half Dallas and Chargers showdown as well. They do have, what is the $10 one? That is, I think it's 500 to first, but actually pretty flat payouts. They have the $3, $12, $50. So they do actually have some halfway decent contests there as well. So I think we've talked about it before, Brian. Fourth quarter, second half, full game is definitely the most profitable in terms of preseason. So, I mean, I know what I do is I literally just have the plug for that specific game. Player comes in that, let's say we're expecting them to come in the first half, and this other person's going to come in next. When the person comes in, just cross them off, and I'm not using them in my second half lineup.
Yep, that's the move. I mean, that's why we put the notes together the way we do. So no matter what contest slate you're playing, you're able to use the notes effectively.
Yep. So we got some questions in here. First one from Gabe says, yesterday top running back had over 50% ownership. Who do you think gets that high today?
I don't know if we will, just because there are a decent amount of options today, right? The Tampa Bay running backs, Tennessee running backs, Dallas running backs, Minnesota and San Francisco to an extent. I don't know if any one running back's going to get that high. If I had to guess, I would say the Tampa running backs, but it's a very dissimilar slate from last night, where last night we didn't recommend you play a running back in flex just because of the receiver options and the lack of running back options. I think it's the opposite tonight. I think there are a ton of running backs you can play that have a ceiling of 10 plus points.
Okay. Let's see here. David says, do you think Trask can go the whole game?
Yeah, we're kind of flying blind here, but it doesn't sound like Gabbert's going to go long. They didn't play their quarterback 4 last week. All the beats seem to think it's going to be a repeat of last week with Trask, so that means 3 quarters potentially, right? So yeah, it's one of those situations. There are some teams we're just not going to know. We have to guess. So, and they didn't do this last year, which makes it even more interesting that they played Trask so much last week. But yeah, I would say Trask probably gets 2 quarters, maybe 3 quarters of action.
Okay. And then he says, for the Miami Dolphins running backs, do you have any favorite snap count over others today? They have like 10 of them.
Dude, it's so bad. They have so many running backs, and they're gonna play all of them. Let me see real quick what our notes have for Miami last week. If you look at last week, Miami had. Let me see here.
They played a bunch. They played 5
They played
running backs.
Yeah. So they had. Let's see here. So Ahmed played 33%, Gaskin played 29%, Dokes 18%, Sonny Michel 13%, Zaquandre White 7%. Chase Evans didn't even play. He might play this week if the starters play. So I mean that's 5-6 running backs that you don't need to even try to attempt unless you're playing. I don't even know if they're on a showdown slate, but like you don't even need to try there, because if you get lucky and they score 10 points, that's great, but that's not even going to help you compared to all these other running backs who have 15 plus point upside.
Yeah, definitely. Ed says, looking for back-to-back week takedowns, who's the third string tight end this week?
I'll give you a name. And this is one of my favorite nuggets we have this week, Moose. It's with Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh's reporters do a great job of highlighting their practices. And in the plug, we actually put this together. There is a detailed practice report from the most recent Pittsburgh practice. And those practice reports, based on our years of doing this, are very indicative of who's going to play in the preseason game and how many snaps they're going to get. So we just Control F, find how many times this player's name was mentioned in this practice report to get a sense. And the guy who was mentioned the most, and he actually had, I think, 4 targets last week, played a decent amount of snaps for Pittsburgh, is their tight end. And that is Connor Hayward. And he was mentioned like 12 times in this practice report, lining the fullback tight end. So Hayward's a guy that I don't think many are going to play. I imagine everyone's going to play Tanner Hudson because he's done well in the preseason before. But Connor Hayward is probably my favorite play. And he's the guy that got even more looks than like the starting receivers did in their most recent practice.
It's like when you have like your backups are so bad and they don't have time to go through 3-4 progressions, they just throw it to the tight end in the flat every time.
Yeah, exactly. Real quick, David said he's looking for variance. I just don't think you need to do it at running back tonight. There's enough plays to play those guys. Get your variance at the receiver and tight end position. I don't think you need the variance at running back tonight.
Makes sense. Nick says top wide receiver play. We don't necessarily give out top plays, you can read it in the plug. But if you have questions about a specific wide receiver, we'll definitely be able to help you out there. Chris says, in general, which DFS sports have the highest and lowest variance?
That's a great question. That's a really good question. I
would say probably for highest variance, you probably would have to say like MLB, I guess.
Yeah, like any event-based sport is going to be pretty high variance. So like baseball, hockey. I would even say MMA to an extent, just based on the binary nature. Golf is probably the most variant of any sport. That's fucking insane sport. I would say golf. Low variance, if you play it correctly, it can be MMA. If you play, I think NFL can be lower variance. NBA is lower variance in the sense that you probably just lose all the time, and that's really low variance. So that would be mine. Any showdown too is probably pretty high variance.
Yes, yeah. So, let's see here. David says again about top anticipated snap count percentage at wide receiver and running back.
Yeah, that's close enough. We'll say. I think Tampa Bay, Dallas.
Oh, that means in general. Okay, go ahead.
Tennessee running backs. Those are the running backs. Tennessee, Tampa Bay, Dallas running backs. The highest snap counts. Receivers a little tougher. The Minnesota guys. They're from the LA school of thought. Kevin O'Connell is. So they're not going to play the starters really. So they're going to play a lot of the backups, a decent amount of snaps. So Minnesota receivers. And then the LA guys got a lot of snaps last week. Will it translate this week? I'm not 100% convinced. But the field's going to play it that way. Joe Reedy, Michael Bandy. So I think the field is expecting that. Let me see if there's any other receivers here. That's the Tennessee guy should get a ton of runs too at receiver. Because they have some injuries, they're resting some starters. So I think Tennessee receivers are a sneaky spot too.
Okay, cool. So we got 5 minutes left until we get up out of here. I'm going to, if I can figure out how to do this. Sorry, the YouTube thing was messing up. But there was a thing we were going to do. I was talking to you about it before, Brian, but we don't have 12 different categories to do it. So I'm just going to start with the handful of categories as we take it out. Which, like, top play, whether it could be like high owned play, are you avoiding tonight?
Probably George Pickens. Like if I played one lineup, I would not play Pickens. I think he'll be popular after all the camp hype, his ADP rising, his touchdown last week. The trends show that there's probably going to be a reversal of how the snaps are distributed at wide receiver. Pittsburgh has a very predictable snap trend at receiver in their second and third preseason games. So I think Pickens is overowned. If you're playing a low-risk contest, like a 50-50 double-up head-to-head, you probably have to play him just to block, because if he scores 10, 12 points, you're probably screwed. Yeah. But I think there are much better plays. So I would say Pickens is the guy I'm avoiding. I don't like the Dallas running backs as much. I was talking to Chris in our staff chat right before we went live here. I think there are much better spots. But, yeah, as I say that, Pickens is definitely going to score another touchdown tonight.
And then Marcus says here, Burks, is he, if he plays, is he a good play?
Yeah, that he's a tricky spot too, because he left practice, was a little gimpy, returned, had a sleeve on, didn't go through all the drills, played a decent amount last week. Obviously, we saw the conditioning issues in OTAs. I don't know. I prefer the other Tennessee receivers tonight, and those are the guys we list out in the plug. I think there's a chance he's limited. I think there's a chance he doesn't even play, just based on what happened in the most recent practice.
Makes sense to me. Cool. So, 1 minute left. Brian, any last lingering thoughts, comments, concerns you want to talk about before I take us out of here?
High-level strategies tonight. Stack a receiver with your quarterback. Play a running back in flex. I think it's one of the best nights to do that. Don't get cute at running back. I mean, we have some guys listed, but just go to the depleted backfields. Play those guys. Receiver, there is going to be some ownership concentrated. And unlike last night, where the ownership concentrated on the LA and New England receivers, that was rightfully so, because we knew those guys were going to play like 75% snaps, maybe even more in LA's case. That's not the case tonight. So any ownership increase on receivers tonight is unwarranted. And we have a lot of guys that are going to be like 1 to 2% owned that are probably going to see just as much playing time. So get crazy at receiver, and again, just scale it down on the contest you're playing. If you're playing a 100-man league, you don't got to play 4 super low owned receivers. But if you're playing the big GPP, feel free to play them, and hope that they outperform these guys that are going to be 20-30%.
You pretty much summed it up as best as I could. So That'll be pretty much it for tonight. Again, if you guys have any more questions, you go ahead and hit up the Discord, occupyfantasy.com/Discord. Is how you can go ahead and get access to that. If you're a member, you do have access to the daily plug, occupyfantasy.com. Check it out there. We'll be updating it there. If you don't have any of that, follow us on Twitter, occupyfantasy on Twitter, where we'll be retweeting some of the more major news that breaks if we have enough time to. But until next time, I'm Moose. He's Brian from occupyfantasy.com. Have a good night.